Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Academic Tradecraft workshop series. This is the third of 6 that will be recorded and hosted this year. And the topic today is navigating academic simultaneity. And I realize that this is a bit obscure. What do I mean by academic simultaneity? Hopefully this will become clear as this introduction moves on. And just as a quick announcement before I start, I just wanted to also let everybody know that the next Academic Tradecraft workshop will take place on February 28th. And this theme will be about the use of social media, about the relevance of self-curation as part of an academic career. And that will be also a recording and a live presentation. So, navigating academic simultaneity. So, I realize that this is obscure. I realize that this is not unlike the other topics, it's not one that immediately reaches out and grabs you. It's not something you might immediately understand or appreciate, but something that I've been thinking about a lot in my own career. And so I'm going to, as I always do, I'm going to share some of my own experiences in a way that will be hopefully helpful to people. So let me just give you a working definition of academic simultaneity. So this is the capacity to work at, I won't say a high level, because I don't want to make judgments and draw distinctions. Everybody has his or her own sense of a career, what you want to be doing, but to work at what you might think of as your best level on different projects and tasks, not at the same time, but within a period of time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 6 months as the block of time that's going to structure the techniques and the framework that I'm going to introduce. And hopefully the logic of why 6 months will become obvious as I go on. And I'm going to discuss some factors that affect this demand to have to work on multiple projects at the same time within a period of time, which is, again, I'm going to use 6 months for, say, heuristic purposes. Like I said, I'm going to give you some tips and strategies, and then we'll end this. Now, a couple preliminary remarks, again, that I've made in the other recordings, the other videos, is that I want to be clear that my discussion of what I'm calling academic simultaneity reflects, in a way, my own trajectory, but it also reflects a particular kind of career path in academia. And I say that because I want to acknowledge that there are many different paths in academia. And not just what I'll talk about academic simultaneity here, but in general, the kinds of topics and themes that I've been discussing over the course of this year do apply to a certain kind of academic career and not others. And again, that's not a way of drawing a distinction and saying this one is a better kind of career or this one is lacking in some way, including perhaps my own. It's just a way of sharing my own experiences that in a way that people might find helpful. So, and another preliminary remark that I want to make more specifically about this academic simultaneity, again, the capacity to work at your best level on different projects and tasks within a period of time, is that this is not an exercise in time management. I think that a lot of academics of all levels make that mistake of thinking, I don't have enough time to do this, I don't have enough time to do that. If only I had enough time, I would be able to do this project. And the mistake there is to think that this demand, this inescapable demand to, in a sense, have to work on multiple projects and advance those projects at your best level, however you define that, in a single period of time, is something that you're going to find at one point of your career and not others. But what I would say after working as an academic for almost 20 years is that this is something which is there all the time. The kinds of demands, the kinds of projects will change over the years, but this overriding need to be able to manage this problem, this issue, or even potential of academic simultaneity, that doesn't go away. And a lot of people become disheartened, a lot of people become disenchanted, they become overwhelmed. And I think that's in part not because of an inability to manage academic simultaneity, but it's more a sort of unwillingness to see it for what it is, which is, in a sense, the existential condition of most academic careers. So this is something which is you'll be confronting for your entire career. And to sort of start this recording, I want to start with a concrete example. And I'm here at Oxford this year, so I'll use a sort of typical Oxford PhD student, which could be a typical PhD student, or maybe an early career researcher. So imagine a PhD student who's finished the research of whatever kind. I'm an anthropologist. It could be field work. You could be a philosopher, and having finished, let's say, your archival research, your conceptual research, it could be a historian. It doesn't really matter. Mostly thinking of social sciences and humanities. But let's say you finished everything, and now you are, in a way, working on your thesis. And by working on, I don't mean preparing for it, but I mean you're actually writing it. And let's say that this PhD student is, say, roughly halfway through the process of writing a first draft, and she or he hopes to finish in general in, let's say, 6 months. Okay. Now the problem is that within this period of time, the 6 month block, there will be other projects that the PhD student will have to advance to work on. For example, there'll be postdoctoral applications. Although the person is not postdoctoral, the PhD student hopes to be postdoctoral within a certain period of time. And of course, as you all know, because applications have deadlines and they come up, this PhD student has to work on and advance and do a good job, work at the best that she or he can on those postdoctoral applications at the same time that she or he is working on advancing the thesis. There might also be an invitation to give a lecture, an invited lecture in one of the courses in the department, which is great because then the PhD student will be able to gain teaching experience. So he or she has to prepare for the lecture, to give the lecture, and that takes time. During the same block of 6 months, there might be an offer by colleagues in the department, or maybe professors, people the PhD student knows as part of these emerging networks, to organize a conference panel at the association of XYZ, and that also takes time to conceptualize the panel, to do the emails, to bring this together. We all know how much time that takes. There might also be, during the 6 month period, the strong pressure from the professor, the major professor, to have drafted and submitted 1 or 2 articles, again, during the same 6 month block of time. And that's also gonna take effort to figure out how to include that as part of these multiple tasks. And just finally, and this is not an exhaustive list, and you can think of your own situation, the PhD student is involved in a student association, the postgraduate student association of the discipline, and that involves meetings and events. It might involve political activities. So all of these things are taking place at the same level, at the same time. And this is what I mean by academic simultaneity. This is not a question necessarily of time management. This is a question of thinking about how to put all of these projects together, both in a way quantitatively, in terms of deadlines, and qualitatively, in terms of the relative importance to career goals and to what you hope to accomplish within this 6 month block of time. Now, what I said about starting with the recognition that academic simultaneity is an existential condition, what I mean is that this PhD student, if the PhD student hopes for a teaching career, after those postdoctoral application, let's say the postdoctoral application is successful, after 2 years of a postdoctoral position, this person will be looking for a permanent teaching position. And if it's here in the UK, they'll be looking for a lectureship, a permanent lectureship. Be fast forward 5 years, fast forward 6 years, or whatever amount of time, and this person will be confronting the same existential condition of academic simultaneity, writing, committee meetings, and so forth, but will have other task primarily around teaching. So this PhD student who's not really teaching at this point will now have, as a major project, as a major task that one will have to deal with within these blocks of time, whether they're semesters or terms, all of the tasks, all of the things that go with teaching. So what happens is as an academic career unfolds, the imperative, the demand of academic simultaneity, that doesn't change. It just becomes more diverse. It doesn't become worse or better. It changes, but it remains there for a career. Okay, so what do? Do you throw up your hands and say, I'm done, this is ridiculous, this is absurd, this is too much work, this is fast academic production? You know, there are lots of ways in which people respond to this feeling of being overwhelmed. And again, what I'm arguing is that that's absolutely not necessary. That what you can do is, in a way, in reimagining and reconceptualizing this existential condition, you will be able to confront it and actually see this as just a normal part of an academic career and something that hopefully you'll come to embrace and appreciate. So let's look in more detail. Okay, so I talked about simultaneity, and I want to say a little bit more about that. And I want to draw a distinction here between working on and working at. So what I mean by that is, during this 6-month period of time, you are working on those projects I mentioned, going back to the doctoral student, the thesis, the applications, the conference organization, the strong pressure to write articles, the political activity, your association activity. In a sense, you are working on those tasks in that 6-month block of time. But that is different than saying you're working at those tasks. And that's just the recognition that it's just impossible practically to be working at writing your thesis and working at, say, writing an article at the same time. You can't work at two different things at the same time. You could be maybe thinking about something, but actually working at it in a systematic way is impossible. So drawing a distinction between working on and working at is the first kind of step. And you know, something that you might hear about is that it's important to limit the projects and tasks you're working on during a period of time so that you can effectively work at one project like the thesis as opposed to the others. In other words, you might get the advice to just say no to these projects. And I would argue that that is not, in most cases, the best option. Why? Because if you are saying no to projects that you consider important to your career, then in a way you're having to make choices that will have consequences later. I mean, take the obvious example. If you say, look, I just need to work on my thesis and finish my thesis, and then I'll work on postdoctoral applications next year. Well, that means that you're going to, let's assume you finish your thesis in August or June, then you're going to have already missed the deadlines for the postdoctoral positions that were going to start in the fall, and you'll have to now wait a year, which might be fine, that might be good, but it's just an example of the consequences of just saying no. So what I would suggest is that it's not necessary to just say no. With the right sort of approach to the problem of academic simultaneity, you should be able to truly advance, and that doesn't mean complete, but you should be able to truly advance those 6 or 7 projects which you have already identified as part of that 6-month block without having to make distinctions between decisions about hard and fast decisions about do we want one or the other. Okay, again, that's another piece of advice which comes from this distinction between working on and working at, because you can always, as the 6-month period goes by, you can change your schedule in a way, and I'll talk about the schedule in a minute. You can change your schedule to sort of respond to exigencies, to things that come up, like life comes up, and you know you're not able to even work at one thing because of these other factors that come up. That's completely normal. But let's continue with this and assume that you're not going to take the approach of just saying no. And just to add something to that is, remember what I said, fast forward 5 years. When you're, let's say, a permanent lecturer, you're not going to be able to just say no to several important projects, including teaching projects, including service projects, administrative projects, within that 6-month block of time. There will be, even if you wanted to just say no, there would be a minimum amount of academic simultaneity that you would have to confront in that period. And that would be if you said, well, I'm not going to work on an article, I'm not going to try to turn my thesis into a book, I'm not going to organize conferences. You will still have to deal with the problem of academic simultaneity. But again, as I said, I don't think that the just say no approach is the best one. And here I want to introduce another distinction. So there's a distinction between working on and working at. And here I want to sort of, again, go into more granular detail about the problem of academic simultaneity by drawing a distinction between what we might think of as the vertical and horizontal dimensions of academic simultaneity. So by the vertical, I'm thinking more chronologically. I'm thinking the way in which academic simultaneity can be imagined as a function of deadlines, as a function of and these could be, as I'm going to say, either self-imposed or external deadlines. But there is certainly a vertical access to this problem of academic simultaneity. And I'll say something also, like I said, I'll say more about deadlines. But there's also a horizontal dimension. And that horizontal dimension is, you might think of it here as the qualitative dimension. This is a function of the importance of those, say, 6 projects that you are working on, not always working at, but working on during the six month period of time. So let me say a little bit more about the vertical dimension, about deadlines. So as I said, deadlines can be either external or self-imposed. Now, that's not to say that the external are more important than the self-imposed or vice versa. It's just to recognize that they're different kind of deadlines. It's important to think of that and take that into account. So going back to the thesis and the postdoctoral applications, depending on the university, you might have, or department, you might have more flexibility with the deadline for the submission of the thesis. As we all know, I mean, those of us who are professors, we have students, we talk about a particular deadline within which a first draft will be ready, but life intervenes, other things intervene, and the deadline gets moved. So that's more flexibility. There's obviously bureaucratic deadlines around theses. Say a person has a maximum of 5 years, after which they might be kicked out of the program. But leaving those aside, it is a kind of self-imposed deadline. But then the postdoctoral applications, grant applications, the deadline to get the conference proposal in. Those are external deadlines. Those are deadlines which are not under the control of us. So we have to work in a different way toward those deadlines. So there's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about with deadlines is when it comes to writing projects, particularly collective writing projects, like let's say edited volumes or special issues and so on. And this brings me back to it's part of my argument why I don't think people should, as a default mode, just say no to everything you're being asked or presented with. Because when it comes to writing deadlines, now writing is an important part of what we do, books, articles, etc., special issues, those deadlines tend to be more flexible. And I say this just in recent personal experience. There might be a deadline that you work out with a journal editor or with the guest editor of a special issue, and March 1st. And that is what we might think of as a kind of soft deadline, which is partially external and partially self-imposed, meaning self-imposed by the collective, maybe by the editors. But if you are being presented with the opportunity, say, to contribute to a special issue, and you just don't think you can include this among the projects you're going to be working on during this period of time because you don't think you'll be able to work at that project, the practical dimension of it, my recommendation would be not to not just say no, with the idea that it's likely, probable that writing deadline will get pushed back. So just to say that deadlines are not always they're not always of the same kind. They're different kinds of deadlines. You might think of that as the practice of deadlines. Learning, we can maybe do an entire academic tradecraft just on the question of deadlines. That might not be so interesting for people. But the point I wanted to make about the deadlines is that even focusing on the vertical dimension of academic simultaneity, the chronological dimension, the navigation part of it, the confronting it, the working with it, the working within academic simultaneity is never just about time management. I would want to say that this is more about project management. It's more about thinking about how it's in a way life management. Okay. All right. So with all of that as sort of preliminary, let me give you some more practical tips on how, assuming you don't want to say no, assuming you agree with the argument that academic simultaneity is really in a way the existential condition of what we do. It's not something which can be avoided. It shouldn't be avoided. It presents you with the opportunity to advance a number of things within a single block of time and to continue to do that for many years. And as I said, assuming that you agree that once you become a lecturer, once you take on those tasks, you can't say no. You have to confront this. And again, I guess the ethical part of this presentation is that I would not want people to feel overwhelmed or to feel disappointed or disenchanted because of how this seems. I'm hoping people will be able to, in a way, navigate this condition without getting disenchanted or feeling like you have to do something else with your life, assuming this is what you've chosen to do. Okay, so what I do, and I'll give you my own technique, and your experience will vary. And this brings me back to the 6 months. What I do is I create what I call a 6-month overview of all the tasks, all the projects that I want to advance within that period. Okay, and some of those projects within that 6-month period, and of course I work in a semester system. So for me, the 6-month period is a period which maps on to roughly semesters, but I extend it beyond the end of the semester. But it's roughly in these 6 month blocks. But if you're, say, here at Oxford, they teach on the academic rhythm is structured around 3 8-week terms. That's a bit different, but it doesn't change this advice. But what I do is I create these 6-month overviews of all the tasks. And some of the tasks which are in that period are tasks which are holdovers from the prior 6 months. So for example, this year I am working on a book, and that's my primary task, and I'm on sabbatical. So actually, when you're on sabbatical, this is one of those exceptions to the issue of academic simultaneity. But these come around so rarely that it's not really worth sort of planning your career around a 1 year or a 6-month sabbatical. But nevertheless, this book is something which the project itself will extend beyond 6 months, but it is one of the projects in that task. But you would want to then decide on what those are. It could be an article, it could be your teaching tasks, it could be other kinds of things. Now, when I talk about the projects, I mentioned this before, to say advance does not mean to complete. That's an important distinction. It's not that within those 6 months, there are 4 projects that you want to advance and finish. That's not the point of that. It's to advance it in a way that you are happy with, satisfied, and you feel like you're working at your best level. Of course, there are going to be tasks which you will have to finish within those 6 months, particularly those things like job applications, deadlines, and so on. That will obviously be something you want to advance and finish. It's just to say that advance is not the same thing as complete. So then what I do is once I've decided, and I spend a considerable amount of time, it could be days, conceptualizing, imagining, thinking about which projects I want to advance. I don't look at the calendar beyond the 6 months, but I'm thinking about the projects. Which projects do I want to advance? At that point, then, I go on and create micro calendars, what I call micro calendars. And those micro calendars now start to think more practically in terms of chunks of time within that 6-month period. And those micro calendars could be themselves different. I could have different micro calendars. I could have monthly micro calendars, things that I want to do within that month. And I could also have micro calendars that are weekly. Again, it depends on the project. For example, if you have a deadline for a job application, you might have as one of your micro calendars, you might have your working at tasks defined on a day-to-day basis leading up to that deadline. So you know what you will be doing, what you'll be working at. Now, you don't need to think about what you're working on, because once you finalize your overview of 6 months, then you shouldn't really think too much about the working on problem, which will just interfere with your capacity practically to work at and follow these micro calendars. Okay, so I don't want to give you too much sort of direction about how to do the micro calendars. As I say, that will depend on who you are. But as I said, I end up with my micro calendars being on both monthly and weekly basis. So I know what I'm working at or what I want to work at every day during that 6-month period, during the working week. Now, again, your experience will vary. Your working week will be defined in different ways. And like I said, I'm not talking about what the impact of family and all the other things that we all have to confront, how that will change. But nevertheless, in order to advance, in order to effectively work on 6 projects, let's say, or however many, and to convert that into the working at technique of the micro calendars, you will have to have, or you should have, your days more or less planned. And people have asked me how to go then from that level down to a much more even granular level. How do you plan the days? And again, it depends on the project. You should have at a certain point a good knowledge of what it takes for you to advance certain projects, like writing projects, in a certain amount of time. Again, assuming that other things don't intervene. But if we're just talking about the academic things, if you use the micro calendars, you should be able to teach your classes and work on the job application and work on an article, work at an article, and to do these different things at the same time, meaning within a 6-month period. But just to give you my own experience about writing, when I've scheduled writing for the book, for example, I have word goals. So I would say minimum, I'm trying to write 1,000 words on a particular day in which I'm working on a book chapter, let's say. And so a good day, I might write more than that. And by write 1,000 words, those should be good. That should be good writing that could eventually be published after being revised. But I have these writing goals. And so with writing articles and books, it really does become a quantitative exercise. You know how many words you want to write: 10,000 words, 9,000 words. A book is, let's say, 100,000 words. So you can then see more or less how long it's going to take you to finish again, about a book, sections, chapters, and ultimately arrive at a first draft of a book. Now, things like organizing conferences or preparing for classes, those have their own temporalities, let's say. But eventually, you'll want to know how long it is going to take you to prepare a lecture, how long it's going to take you more or less to come up with an abstract for a conference. You know, you can, in a way, you can render most of those projects into quantitative terms. And then based on that, you can then fine-tune your micro calendar to allow you to advance those projects within the 6-month period. Okay. So a couple final things. So your overview is in place. You know, you're happy with this overview. You feel satisfied with the projects that you want to be working on during the 6-month period. Your micro calendars are more or less constructed, taking consideration of the fact that there's going to be changes, both fine-tuning changes internal to the process itself, and then responding to the big things that come from outside the process, i.e. life. What happens then? So what do you do with these micro calendars? And again, I'm just going to use my own experience. Then I switch into a different mode. And again, your experience is going to vary. This is my experience, but I can tell you what I do if people would find it helpful, is that I switch into a mechanism that I describe as bird by bird. What is the bird by bird technique or mechanism? And here, this is something I drew from a book written by the author Anne Lamott, which is called Bird by Bird. And this, I think the subtitle is Essays on Writing and Life or something like that. But the title of Bird by Bird comes from an anecdote that she relates, which I have found very useful in my academic career, which is that when she was a child, her brother had to do what in the United States, if you're American, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not from other countries, if you're from other countries, I'm not sure what the equivalent here is, but everybody has had this experience in grade school, in middle school. In America, we have it's just infamous, the book report. You know, you're given an assignment when you're 12 years old, 13 years old, to go write a book report about something, you know, about economics or about some event in history. There's a book report. And so when I was a kid in the pre-internet era, what we would do is we would go to the encyclopedia. This is before Wikipedia. You go to the encyclopedia, you pull out E for economy, and you flip through it, and there are 40 pages on economics or economy, and you're somewhat citing and learning from, but mostly just sort of copying what you're reading in the encyclopedia, and you put together this 3-page, 4-page book report, and it's excruciating, and I'm not sure it's a very good exercise for students. But going back to Anne Lamott, he was given a book report assignment to write about birds. So he got the B out of the encyclopedia and he went to birds, and it was this massive entry about bird species and bird evolution and birds in urban areas, and it was just overwhelming. So her brother, Anne Lamott's brother, goes to their father and said, "Dad, you know, I need some help. I'm completely overwhelmed. What do I do?" And the father said, "Son, just take it bird by bird." And so in a way, I find that a useful strategy for managing these micro calendars and how to sort of go through this. Again, it's just bird by bird. Once you have the micro calendars, then you're just basically taking each of those segments of actual working at the practical act of doing those things one after the other, okay? It's just going through that. And I know this is going to sound strange. It's going to sound kind of extreme, but I find it very helpful to just tune everything else out. I mean, you don't want to think about what you're going to do next week. You know, what are you doing next Tuesday, next Wednesday? What's on your micro calendar for the next week? And you certainly don't want to spend a lot of time agonizing about the working on dimension, the 6 month. Oh, should I be doing other things? Because again, once you start agonizing about those bigger questions, it's going to be very difficult. And then it feels overwhelming. Should I have been doing this? Should I not have been doing that? That's why it's very important to spend enough time in the initial period of designing the 6 month overview to be relatively happy given what's going on with you, to be able to take it down to those levels of working at. Then you work your way through your micro calendar, you make adjustments, and at some point you're going to get to the end of that 6 month period and you're going to reflect on what happened. Did you manage to advance those projects in the way that you were hoping at the beginning of the 6 months? And the answer is usually partly, but partly not. And then what happens is you turn to the next 6 months and you make your next 6 month overview, which might bring some projects for others you finished. And for example, let's say one of your work projects was an article manuscript. Well, what's going to happen in the next 6 months is you're going to get your reviews back. You'll have to adapt to those. You'll have to incorporate the revisions into your next 6 month period and then refine it down to the level of the micro calendars. But eventually you will have your next period of time in a way mapped out so that you can navigate it well. And then you just do that every 6 months, for the rest of your career. And again, that's just one model, but it is one that I think would be useful for people. It's a model that I myself use to deal with the different projects that I want to advance during these periods of time. And yeah, so that's what I have to say about navigating academic simultaneity. I wish you the best of luck, and I will see you all again at the end of February to discuss the problems and possibilities of self-curation.